All right, let's get started. Good morning. Y'all can fight over what biscuits are left up there in the audience. Ask Representative Fleming to open us up in a word of prayer this morning.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Please bow your heads with me. Lord, we pause as we always do at the beginning of this meeting to ask that your wisdom be in this room with us. We ask you now as we come to this pivotal day in the legislative session to give us the ability to get through it with our minds in the right place for the people of this state. Bless us and keep us as we move forward. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Representative Fleming. I'm wearing those cufflinks you gave me when I was a freshman. There's a story behind those when Representative Fleming presented these to us. He said that the lawyers in the legislature have to be sharks. So be a shark today, and other members, I implore you to do the same. First bill I'm going to call is Chairman Gunner's. You can just sit right there, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like. Which number are you? 16.
16. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bring to you House Bill 450 again. This is the LC number is 491383S. There are two changes in the bill. If you go to line 41, basically it's the number of the board that was changed in that line. It was originally 19, now it's 20. And if you go over to line 51, the next page, after the word police, we added in and the executive director of the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. That gives them a seat at the table and have input on how the data is handled. And there's the other change since we last met and talked about the bill is that the Legislative Committee for the Judicial Council has approved this bill. They endorse it.
Okay. So. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right. Any questions for Chairman Gunner on this bill? All right. We didn't have a sign-up sheet out where we beat things like a dead horse. Then we did like the Comanches of old. We got that dead horse up and rode it 50 more miles. That's from a John Wayne movie, The Searchers. So anyways, a little movie trivia. I do know that we have one of our clerks here, it looks like, with Mr. Holloman. Good morning. Since you hadn't been with us, I'll give you 2 minutes to speak if you'd like. Okay, all right. Fannin County. Well, that's a good county up there. We appreciate all the good work that you do. Okay. Okay. Opposition noted from the Clerk's Authority. Council of Superior Court Clerks. Gotcha. Yeah, that website was down yesterday when I was trying to find a deed. Council of Superior Court Clerks. Okay, maybe y'all can give them a call over there to the authority and tell them to get the system up on Sunday. All right. Any discussion from members of the committee? No. Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Gunter and I have had a couple of 3 conversations about this, and the sheer mechanics of the bill is not really my issue. I know that if he's behind it, it's in the format that will work and the constraints within it sits. My issue is what I call a bigger issue, and I think I expressed it previously about the direction we're headed with what I see as the whole criminal filing system. And we faced a dilemma on the civil side, and our choice was, do we go a government route and let government agencies try to create a system for us, or do we go to the private sector that was already doing it successfully? 7 years ago, I don't know how many years ago, we put millions of dollars, 5-6 years ago, into a system that a government agency was trying to figure out for us, and to this date we still don't have a unified criminal justice filing system to my knowledge. And my concern is that we got to move back toward the private sector. These are people who are innovative, and they solve the problem for us on the civil side, and that's why I'm not opposed to the mechanics of the bill as much as I am the overall concept, and want us to think about that.
Okay. Thank you. Any other discussion? All right. What say you on the committee?
Move to pass.
Got to move to pass? Is there a second?
Second.
Moving and second, do pass. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. Looks like the ayes have it. Congratulations. I'll sign your form forthwith, Mr.
All
Chairman.
right, thank you.
All right. Next bill we'll hear is 487. Chairman Newton, good to see you this morning.
It's good to be here. I don't know about the shark comment earlier. I did tell someone that an ER doctor in a room full of attorneys is like a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. So I'll be brief and I'll be cautious. But I do appreciate what y'all do. We work together to protect all patients, but we also work together to protect staff, and that's what House Bill 487 regards. It actually builds on a previous legislation this committee and the entire legislature passed that protected emergency workers from workplace violence. It did that by having some minimum criteria for conviction of workplace assault and workplace battery. There are some facts that show at least back in 2018, the latest data I've seen is that healthcare workers were 5 times more likely to experience workplace violence than all other workers, or the average for all workers. Actually, in workman's comp claims for nursing and other fields in healthcare, 22% of them, of the lost time and the injuries, are due to workplace violence. So it's a serious issue. It's one of many that affect workforce. Of course, we have a shortage. We've got the travel nursing problems. We got the budgetary problems or the stresses on our hospital trying to hire enough staff. And if anything, since 2018, this has only gotten more challenging as patients are frustrated. What we can't have them do is take that frustration out on our nursing and other staff, because really if people leave the nursing field to go into something less controversial, it'll only make our challenges worse. House Bill 487 does this by having some, let's say at least on line 60, by the way, I'm working on LC 339411S, about aggravated, let's say starting on line 50, aggravated assault, 3 to 20 years, and aggravated battery down in line 60, 5 to 20 years. So those are some, what this bill will do is extend what currently exists for workers in the emergency department and behavioral health areas, which are the 2 largest and most combative, if you will, areas at times. This would extend it to all healthcare workers. It does exclude the reference in there of Title 31, Chapter 7, I believe, says where this bill applies, and that does not apply to physician offices, urgent care centers, and outpatient offices like that. But it does apply to other healthcare facilities that are licensed, such as a hospital, a rehab center, nursing home, things like that. So that's the bill. Well, I know we've discussed it previously, and there is other legislation that addresses this that also includes some additional post-certified potential security and items like this. This bill 487 is a little more narrowly tailored, just to really to mimic and to extend to all healthcare workers what's currently the policy for healthcare workers in emergency departments.
Okay. All right. Got a couple questions. Representative Kendrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm trying to reconcile it with Representative Reese's bill. So if it's excluding emergency health workers, I know in Representative Reese's bill it included more people. So
I'm sorry, this still doesn't do anything about the emergency healthcare workers. It just includes a larger group that include emergency department workers, but it includes all workers in a hospital, for example.
Okay,
all
so it
workers.
was a heightened 3-year,
yes,
I believe, in Representative Reese's bill. So this would be no less than 3 years, no more than 20 years under lines 50 through 53, plus the additional 3 years if Representative Reese's bill's passed. I'm trying to understand the penalty portion of it.
I don't believe they would be cumulative. Once again, I'm not an attorney, but I think one or the other would apply. I believe has had 3 years. I don't believe we're adding 3 plus 3. Is that your question?
No, I'm asking, I guess on line 53, I'm trying to understand the conviction part. So it says not less than 3 years, no more than 20. So I'm assuming that's sort of a base. And then if we pass Representative Reese's bill, would there be an additional 3 years? No? Okay. Thank you.
All right. Number 13. Vice Chairman Reeves.
Chairman Newton, you and I got a chance to talk briefly today, and then you attended the hearing on House Bill 383, the Safer Hospitals Act. That included the hospital campus police, but in terms of putting hospital workers on the same list as teachers and transit employees and paramedics, that's what my bill and your bill does, right?
You say transit, you're not addressed in this legislation, but you're saying the same protected.
There's existing legislation where
Yes,
you can't
we
beat
do
up a teacher, you can't beat up a MARTA bus driver or a paramedic, and this sort of includes hospital workers on that list.
Both of them are
people
pretty
help
close.
those who are protecting and serving us.
That's correct, they are.
Okay. And Representative Silcox, Chairman Gunter, we had the Kendrick Amendment on the hospitals bill, bipartisan. We had Representatives Evans, Holcomb, Mughal on my bill. Appreciate what you're doing also to protect the healthcare workers.
Thank you.
All right. No other questions. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, what's the will of the committee? Move second, do pass. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. All right, ayes have it. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman. If you'll get me that form.
I have it. I'll get it right to you. Thank you, sir.
All right.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you being out. Did you get a steak biscuit, Doc?
I see him over there.
Yeah, get you some. It's good. Good for your heart. That's what I've been told. House Bill 364. Representative Holcomb. Now, I've got a question, and I may have asked you this before, Representative Holcomb. What was your rank when are you still in, or what was your rank again?
It was a long time ago. I left as a captain.
I got you. Well, Captain, good to have you with us this morning. Tell us a little bit about your bill, and it looks like it's a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Happy crossover day. This bill is to reform the process in which we compensate the wrongly convicted. In other words, innocent people that spent time in prison. The way that it works now, and more likely than not we will see this in the course of today, is an individual legislator has to file a bill after a request is made through the Claims Advisory Board, which is attached to the Secretary of State's office, and that individual bill has to go through the entire legislative process. Has to go through the House, has to go through the Senate, and has to be signed by the governor. The process is wrought with politics, and what we're trying to do is to take the politics out of it. What I have heard from members as recently as just last week after the Appropriations Full Committee heard these resolutions is that many members don't feel comfortable making these decisions, even though it is without question that they are innocent and have been exonerated. Many members just don't feel that they have the requisite training, background to make those evaluations. So what this bill does, and I'll go through the sections with you, but to give you the comprehensive overview, is it sets up a committee of experts that will make sure that the individuals who are applying are in fact innocent. So this would not apply to those that may have been released because of some technical violation, but truly for those that are innocent. And then they will evaluate the claims and then make a recommendation. The bill has a range from $50,000 to $100,000. A survey across the United States, and 38 states have similar compensation bills, is that the general range for compensation is about $75,000 a year. This proposal would have a range between $50,000 to $100,000, and what the board would be able to do is to take into account factors relevant to one's earning potential, et cetera. They would then make a recommendation that would go to the Supreme Court, and the the Judicial Council would make a recommendation for these monies to be placed into their budget. My understanding is the way that it works is that the governor's office does not interfere with the Judicial Council budget because of separation of powers, and so it would more likely than not come to the General Assembly as a line item recommendation. The General Assembly would still have its own constitutional purview to review any requests. So if, for example, there was a mistake that was found or some type of problem, we would still be able to evaluate it specifically. But the overall idea is to take the politics out of this process, have experts do the review, and then to make recommendations. So with that, going through the bill has been vetted very carefully, and the language specifically, and this would be in section 4 on page 3, is only for those that have been found innocent. Page 4 has the membership of the organization. I had an informal meeting with the Supreme Court and received a helpful suggestion that was incorporated in line 71. Line 71 used to say just a judge, but they also suggested a retired judge or retired justice. We have several retired justices who might be able to play this role and help with the evaluation. You can see the others there are district attorney, defense attorney, and then those that have forensic science backgrounds. Almost all of the exonerations that we've had, in fact, I think all of them have been tied to DNA evidence. And so having somebody that can help with that evaluation, we believe is critical and appropriate. And then the starting on line 141, that sets forth the range of between $50,000 and $100,000. Again, the average across the country is about $75,000. And then the next sections going on to page 8 is that it would go into the Supreme Court's budget. One other very minor change that was recommended informally by the Supreme Court was line 184 and 188 used to say receives and accepts the recommendation. It was suggested that we change that to receives, so that way it doesn't appear as if they're doing any type of de novo judicial review, but rather it's administrative and process, and they believe there is no separation of powers issues if it's just an administrative role that we're asking the court to do, which is to put it into their budget. And then finally, there's the set-off, which we had some discussion about the last time. That begins on page 204. I talked to Legislative Counsel about liens. Legislative Counsel recommended against that. Of course, the committee can certainly endorse that idea if you like. I certainly would not oppose that. I think it makes sense. The reason why it wasn't recommended is because these individuals don't have property. They don't have anything to attach a lien to. They more likely than not don't have much in terms of earnings. Their earnings are likely very minimal, so garnishment also likely wouldn't be all that helpful. But there was an amendment put together, which you should have. It's AM 44-0170. And what that would do is if there was an award or a judgment in a wrongful conviction civil case, the judge would just put into that an offset for any amounts that were received through this administrative process. So it would just be part of the award and the judgment. And so finally, what I would say is, again, we're talking about innocent people and the impact of being incarcerated. I know it's probably obvious to everybody, but it very much negatively impacts one's health. You have a lower life expectancy after spending significant amount of time in jail. More likely than not, these individuals lost their best years of earning power. So they don't have the ability to provide for their own retirements like the rest of us would. And they also lost so much in terms of skills. Even if you were extremely highly skilled when you were incarcerated, if you lost a decade, 15 years, 20 years, just think about what your own professions are like, and if you weren't able to participate in those for those periods of time. It's very difficult to just come back out and make up from where you are. I've heard from some members that they would like to have perhaps an affirmative finding of prosecutorial misconduct. What I would submit to you is that that is the wrong measure to look at. I surveyed all 38 states that have similar compensation resolutions, and not one of them have that extra criteria, because what they are doing is they are compensating the harm of being innocent in having your liberty taken away. And so they are compensating the harm, not any wrongdoing by the government. The federal government also has a compensation statute, and it does not have any requirement for wrongdoing. So overall, I believe this is a very solid bill. It's well researched, it's substantive, and then the actors that are involved have all vetted it, have all provided input into the bill, which has been incorporated to include the prosecuting attorney's council, the defense lawyers, and others. And so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
See like I have one, number 14, Chairman Saines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for bringing this bill. In terms, you mentioned it. Did you say 34 states have
38.
this? 38 states have this kind of system, and we are talking about innocent people. I appreciate your making that distinct, but I find the argument that you're making the same argument. Let's say that some use for taking legislative reapportionment and putting it in a non-political system. So to be clear, we're taking a system we currently have direct authority over and putting it to unelected and appointed individuals. Is that correct?
It is correct in terms of what we're doing. I might disagree with the assertion that the sample that you gave is directly the same. I think that they're a little bit different between reapportionment, redistricting, and wrongful conviction, but the concept is the same of having experts who would help make that decision.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Number 13.
Representative
Chairman
Holcomb, great follow-up since the last meeting, and appreciate you leading on this area. This amendment with the offset, is that a friendly amendment?
Yes.
Okay. When the motion's made, Mr. Chairman, I do have an amendment following the motion if somebody makes it do pass. And one idea, the idea that somebody else brought up about prosecutorial misconduct, the next time I see somebody from the bar without passing legislation, I'm going to ask them to consider in that disbarment section of the bar, maybe include some of these stories so that prosecutors, police, lawyers, judges will get to see mistakes from the past and will, try to keep from repeating them, just like we do with disbarments.
Vice Chairman Silcox, or Chairwoman Silcox, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These cases are extremely rare, right? I think you mentioned in your initial testimony that the burden to prove that these people are innocent is extremely high.
It's extraordinarily rare. My understanding is we have over 70,000 people incarcerated in our state right now. This year, the General Assembly will consider 4 resolutions. Last year, it considered 2. Generally speaking, the numbers in the last decade or so have probably averaged 1 or less per annum. So it is very rare, and thankfully that's the case. I think overall the system works, but the system, like any human system, is not perfect. And unfortunately, there are some people who have their liberty taken away, their time with their loved ones, their families, and it's devastating for those that are innocent that get caught up in this.
I appreciate you bringing this thoughtful bill. I will say that I think it's important and great that you kept the prosecutorial process out of this because, as we found with DNA evidence, for example, that as things go on, times change and technology changes, so I don't think there should be a burden back on those prosecutors.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, number 5, Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a couple of questions. I have some thoughts on the whole issue, but I'll save that for our discussion part. But one thing that interests me over online, let me see it, where we tell the Supreme Court how to handle it. Oh, on line 185. The Supreme Court shall include the compensation recommended by the board. Shall. I bet in those red and black books over there, there's somewhere that we've told the Supreme Court what they shall do, but I find it interesting that we're going to tell them that they have to include money in their budget.
And that was to make it an administrative role. If it's viewed as an administrative role that they are tasked to do, even though it's a shall, the informal feedback that I received is that's actually better to have it to just.
I'm sure they don't want to be involved in the
executing.
decision-making process. Yeah, it's hard. How do we review and evaluate this now. We just voted last week on 4 measures, and they came through a process to get to us, and I'm trying to, in my mind, understand the difference between what we do now and this.
The process as it stands now is the Claims Advisory Board, which is still referenced in this group, the Wrongful Conviction Compensation Review Panel would be administratively attached to the Claims Advisory Board. The Claims Advisory Board is administratively attached to the Secretary of State's office. So an exoneree, an innocent person has to find a legislator and then file a claim to the Claims Advisory Board. That goes through a hearing. Almost every time the Claims Advisory Board recommends against compensating, and the reason is that usually the respondent is the Department of Corrections. Trying to think of any others, but Department of Corrections response is, we didn't do anything wrong, we just housed them because they were convicted, and so there wasn't any affirmative wrongdoing on our part. But then what they will do is they will write a very long analysis saying that they do believe that this person was innocent. So on one hand, they don't believe that the agency did anything wrong and was just following its mandate, but on the other hand, that these individuals were deprived of their liberty and were convicted unjustly. So then it goes to a legislator to then file a bill, and then that is assigned to the Appropriations Committee and works through the entire process. So we don't have any type of oversight to kind of just help with the evaluation of the analysis of innocence right now.
But so that process you just described doesn't ever ask that question?
It does ask that question, but it falls into a very political process that I think that we can do better. And I think I mentioned at the last hearing that last year the resolution that Chairman Hogan carried was the second to last bill passed in the Senate, and it wasn't passed until like 1208, 1209, something like that. And I think that only happened because he and I went over to the Senate in the last minutes of sine die. The resolution that I carried was the third to last that was carried. So these bills sometimes just, they get lost in the shuffle, and I think they're hard to pass. And when you take a step back and just think about these people and what they went through and how the system failed them, and then they watch to see what's happening here, and they're wondering, is it going to happen? Is it going to go through? And
so if I may,
yeah,
Representative, I appreciate you answering that. So here's, I guess, what my question is. This sounds like a good process. And I've worked with you for a long time and usually come up with good processes. Is the process the problem as much, or is it that we have the final say-so through having to introduce a bill? That's what I'm trying to get to with you.
I think through this, we get the benefit of both, because ultimately we still have control through the appropriations process. I'd like to think
I'd like to
that
understand that in a second. Explain it to me, how we have control over it.
and I'd like to think that we would give deference to the people that are looking at this and I would think that they would take this very, very seriously. And they would just have a lot more time to look at it than we would. And I'm an attorney, and I analyzed things very carefully last year when I was asked to carry the resolution. But then there are others who are not attorneys for which the process is pretty difficult to be able to explain exactly with specificity, with clarity, what happened, to then make the case to the body to agree that compensation is appropriate and warranted.
Last question, if I may, Mr. Chairman, on this point. This is what I'm trying to understand. it looks like to me what we're doing is dumping a X amount of millions of dollars into a fund and let somebody else decide how to divvy that up. What if we have a situation where we don't think they did this right? We can't single out and say, give to those four, but not that one, if I understand this process right, and maybe I'm wrong.
I think that we could in terms of
So
the
how is
the
what I'm trying to figure out.
appropriation.
I don't see it here.
Everything would have to go through the appropriations process and through, it would be in the Judicial Council budget. And so their line items would have for these specific resolutions, we could just line out the request for a specific individual if there was, for whatever reason.
So you
some
think this
sense.
requires specific line items, not one lump sum of money that they divvy up?
That's my understanding is how they would do it, would be to have a line item for, say, Jones recommended compensation X, and it would be under the Judicial Council budget, but it would be a specific line item.
That's how they're telling you they do it, or do we require them to do it that way in the bill?
That's how they said that they would do it. I don't know that we went into that level of detail. It just said that it would be in the Judicial Council's budget.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Minority Caucus Treasurer Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I probably should have paid attention to this, but on the ones that we've approved last year and in the past, how do the awards compare to the formula that you're proposing in here?
They're all in that range. I think they've generally been between like 65 and 75,000.
Thank you.
Number 17 over there, Representative Neal.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. It's funny. Once again, I find myself agreeing with Mr. Fleming on the other side over there. Thank you, Mr. Holcomb. I enjoy your measures, like he said, when it comes to always trying to improve our systems and processes. So with that being said, at the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Let's see. I think Vice Chair Reeves had one as far as ahead of yours, so I'll come back to you after his. Vice Chairman Reeves? Or hold on a second. Any discussion on the bill? Number 5.
Mr. Chairman, let's go ahead and have discussion now.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and have discussion, before
So,
we entertain any amendments.
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned earlier, I was trying to remember how long Scott's been here, but I've admired his work because he brings good issues for us and he's well thought out. And my suspicion is that this process he's put in place would very likely be an improvement possibly over the process that we have now. But that brings you to the discussion of the hard part. I've been here for about 20 years, and I don't remember ever voting no on one of these compensation things on the Appropriations Committee. And it's hard. It's hard to sit there and recognize that our system made a mistake and put an innocent person behind bars. And to me, as hard as that is, that's probably a good thing for us to see that the system doesn't work occasionally. What I've always thought I wanted was more confidence that when it got to us, man, I can depend on every shred of detail in here, and there's a report written out explaining to me why it's right, and I wonder if this would help with that. But the fact that we have to introduce a bill and go through that process, as hard as it is probably in my mind a good thing for us to have to do when we deal with this. The other concept, which is a little bit separate, is this whole concept of us being the appropriators in this process. That we control the appropriations process and we not push that to some other entity. So what I would like to see is a better process of how it gets to us, but us still having to introduce that bill and go through the process. And I don't know if you're open to something like that. I don't know if we could perfect something like that even if you were this morning, but I would certainly work with you in the future to try to improve the process before it gets to us, and then still have us, though, have to go through what I call the hard part, because I think it's as unfortunate as it's necessary for a couple of good reasons. Just my thoughts, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Number 17.
Yes, and thank you to my friend on the other side once again affirming that you said yourself this is an improvement, and I think anything that we do when it comes to measures of improving our processes is a good thing, and not continue to be in a situation where we leave the fate of these people to chance year after year if we know that they are innocent in fact. So I appreciate the work done on the bill, and my comments before remain. Thank you.
Chairman Saines.
Thank you. In terms of Representative Fleming's comments, to me there are two victims in this process: the primary victim and ultimate victim who's been wrongfully incarcerated, and a secondary victim that the state then created by the taxpayer, who we're then appropriating funds on their behalf to compensate these individuals. And there's only one body that represents both those individuals, which is the General Assembly. So I also agree that the appropriate, even though hard, stance is having a bill to come to the General Assembly.
Thank you. Number 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't disagree with the sentiment of my colleagues as far as it is hard, and the General Assembly does need to see when the process fails. But the budget is the one thing that we are required to do every session. And so the process that's set up here sets it up so that it's an appropriation line item, and it is not likely to be called after the end of sine die. So I support the bill. I thank you, Rep. Holcomb, for bringing it, and we need to do something for these folks. Their lives have been stripped, and we need to make it as efficient and fair as possible. Thank you.
Representative Kendrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wanted to reiterate something that you said previously, which is, even though it's hard, as Representative Fleming said, for members of the legislature to have to make that choice when the appropriations come down, I think if you examine somebody's hard life of being incarcerated and not being able to make that funds and balance it against the hard of a legislator having to go through the political process, I'm hopeful that we are choosing which hard it is that we're going to support, and we're going to support the people who are incorporated. And isn't one of the main reasons why we're trying to take it out of the realm of the legislature is so that it becomes non-political. It becomes one of those things that goes through a process. You don't have to worry about how somebody's feeling that day, or anything that comes with sort of the nature of us just being politicians and having to go back and get reelected in our district, taking that part out of it so it's as objective as it could possibly be. Isn't that really the underlying reason for this?
It is, and Chairman Fleming's point is well taken. But what you just said, Representative Kendrick, is exactly right. Like, I think all of us know that there are good ideas that get killed in this building without merit, without basis, without substance. And this is a category of people that we want to make sure that that doesn't happen to. It's in many ways that simple.
Okay. No other discussion. Entertain a motion. Got a move, do pass in a second. All right. Believe there's amendment. Vice Chairman Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to amend the substitute to 364 with AM 440170, which is the offset provision.
Okay, and that would only be replacing lines 215 through 221.
That's right, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right. Got a all right, move second. Representative Neal, is that discussion on the amendment that you're wanting to talk about? Okay, all right. Moving a second to replace lines 215 through 221 with the substitute amendment AM 440170. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. All right, ayes have it. Any other? Did you have an amendment you wanted to? All right. Okay, I'll call the question on the bill as a whole. Was that Representative Fleming? Do you have an amendment? Okay. All right. All right. On passage of the bill as amended with AM 440170, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. Ayes have it. Congratulations. We'll get you a rules form signed for you. We are adjourned.